Sawi Omnibus. So one of the things that I've been talking about a lot recently, or that I keep trying to point out, is a perceived failure among the anti-SJW community online that, while certainly their arguments have probably been persuasive for a lot of people, I think that there's a frustration that I see, at least, and I think that they should see as well, that when you have to make jokes about how many times you've had to disprove the wage gap, or having to make video after video after video debunking feminism and the arguments in favor of Islam, it should say something to the fact that these arguments aren't effective, that they're not sinking in, that they're not really persuading enough people to really change the narrative, or to really make a dent in the progressive stranglehold over culture and society. I think there's sort of three reasons for this. Firstly is, I can't really, I'm not going to talk about it in this video because it's something for another video, that they control the media, that they control institutions, they control academia, they control the media, they control large portions of government. Another reason is that when you're in a debate with them, they understand way better than anti-SJWs do that narrative beats argument every time. That when you give somebody a good story, when you illustrate, something in their mind about, when you don't support Black Lives Matter, then this leads to the deaths of innocent young black boys. They can point to these stories. They can, even if they have nothing to do with their arguments, they can point to them and use that as fodder, and that convinces a lot of people. It's pretty evident that it does, as opposed to just listing out fact after fact after fact as to why a particular point is wrong. A painting or piece of music is always going to be way more effective at influencing people than, a sheet of paper with a list of data points on it. I think the third part, the thing that I want to focus on this video, is that when you attack feminism, this is sort of like attacking the head of a Hydra, the ancient, mythological Hydra, the beast that grows multiple heads, and every time you cut one of them off, two more grow back. And I think, this illustration, and I think that this illustration has become quite, easy to use because, frankly, the progressives use it themselves when they talk about intersectionality, that, it's not just about being a feminist. It's not just about being in favor of LGBT rights. It's not just being in favor of Black Lives Matter, that all of these things are sort of united under one ideological banner, that they're all intertwined, that systems of oppression, that it's all linked to the fundamental idea of progressivism, that there's an oppressed class and an oppressor class, and that even deeper than that is that what makes a moral society, in their eyes, what equates to morality, what is good, is what makes people equal. Because, again, at the deepest, at the most basic level, what progressives believe is that all human beings are equal, or, in logical terms, the same. That A equals B, that man equals woman, that black equals white, that Muslim equals non-Muslim, that all worldviews and all value systems are completely valid and should be, celebrated equally, save for those which directly conflict and oppose that same ideology that says all worldviews are equal. And so that's why they are so adamant at shutting down free speech, and they hate groups like Christians so much, because of the fact that, we're fundamentally opposed to their worldview, because we assert that not all worldviews are equal, that there are fundamental differences between people, and that there is an actual objective idea of morality. And even the people who would broadly consider themselves classical liberal atheists, who say that they think morality is subjective, don't act like it. In their actions and their speech, they still believe that they act like morality is actually objective. And I think that what this all comes down to is, if you're going to debate against the progressives, you have to know what lies at the very heart, the core of that movement, of their ideology. And it's the belief that all human beings and all value systems are completely equal, are completely the same and interchangeable. And I think that there's a few ways you can go about attacking this. I've tossed a few of these ideas around my head. I'll give you two of them fundamentally. The first one would be a very simple way of doing it, which would be to state that no, I don't think all human beings are equal. I think that there are fundamental differences between people. And you can, the best example of this will be by saying, because there's so much sort of, basic inherent understanding of this, and certainly tons and tons of scientific evidence for this, is that men and women are not equal, that there are fundamental differences between men and women, that there are certain things that men can do that women can't do, and vice versa. Of course, when you say that, this is a fairly reasonable thing to state. Just like when the progressives say what makes their ideas so palatable is when they just say, well, we're just in favor of equality. We don't like discrimination. And this is what really helps convince a lot of people, because that's something that's, especially in the modern West, that's something that is very palatable and, widely believed by society and held as something that you should be in favor of. And so it sounds reasonable enough, but then of course it leads to being insane. And when you point out with an equally reasonable assertion that, hey, there are fundamental differences between people, like men and women, and people do have different abilities, then that their narrative, their whole, that undermines their whole ideology. Because, again, the point is that equality means the same. And I think that's the fundamental, that's the way you got to approach it, because you have to say that you're not saying that men are better than women or women are better than men or whatever, but you're simply stating that inequality means they are not the same. And so when you say this, the progressives sort of have two options. They can either sort of tacitly agree with you, but then if they then say, well, I still think that, we should make sure that men and women have, there's, an equal amount of women in this field of study or in this, these CEOs, you can say that, but if you do believe that men and women are different, then still arguing for that position is basically the same as saying that there aren't differences between men and women. And then, of course, they can do what they seem to actually be doing right now, is double down and say, actually, no, there aren't biological differences between men and women. And at that point, they sound completely crazy, and, they're completely and just utterly wrong on every angle, because, science and just basic common sense can show that men and women are not the same. And so I think the other way you can go about saying this, and these are not mutually exclusive, I sort of believe in both of them, is the other way you could say it is, well, for me as a Christian, I would state that, well, I think that if we are equal, I think that we are equal in the sense that we all have a soul, that we all attain salvation the same way, and that there's a moral law, that there's a natural morality that we all have to be, that we are all subject to. And I think that, this would be more useful if you're arguing against an SJW who claims to be religious. And the way this works is that basically, rather than, if you look at their narrative, if you look at their line of argument and trying to argue for their point as a train going down some tracks, by just flat out stating, no, I don't think that all people are equal, that basically places a massive concrete barrier in the way, and hopefully the train crashes into it. Or if you use the argument that I think that we are equal, but they're equal according to these various standards, this sort of leads them down a different path, a different track. This sort of switches tracks, and they go down one which would be under a traditionalist and Christian worldview rather than a progressive and Marxist one. And I still fundamentally believe in both, because again, I do think that there are inherent equalities that there are things about all human beings that are the same, that we do all bear the image of God, that we are all redeemed the same way, that there's a standard of morality that we all have to follow, and that we all have a soul, that there is something sacred within all of us. But this does not mean that we're all the same. And I think that this is more or less how the traditional Christian worldview has viewed things like differences between men and women, particularly. Is that not that women are inherently inferior or that they are of less moral value than men, but that they are simply different. And so this has been another ramble. I'm trying to work on being able to improv and just share my thoughts without having to write out a whole script to make making videos a lot easier. So tell me how I did, and leave your comments and thoughts below. Diabana.